All right. Well, first of all, thank you for doing this. Uh,
Thank you for having
oh,
me.
my pleasure. I love the film and was annoyed I had to wait so long to see it, but that's a good thing in a way. Like, obviously, you're not thrilled when it's like I made the movie, like it's been a while, but it's a fun thing to get anticipated for because you maybe more so than almost anything else in a while, you everyone already made the movie in their head because it's impossible not to make that movie as you're reading that, going, wait, what? And nine times out of 10, that means the movie that gets made is going to not be the same thing. And I think in a lot of ways, this is the rare thing. It is the movie we all imagined. And
Oh,
that's,
why, thank you. That's awesome.
it's a credit to you and to Jeremy and everyone just also figuring out like what was actually important here. Like, because it's a movie. I can't tell every single thing that happened. And certain things will maybe take us in a direction that we just don't need to go. Like, what will make this feel right? And that's I mean, more so than I think a lot of other things, that's your job, is like what feels right for this. Like I say yes or no at the end of the day. So what can I say yes to and no to that'll make this right? And
Yeah.
you did it.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like that's so right on. For folks who had read this story on Twitter in, October 2015, well, I need to acknowledge that a part of why the movie exists is that audience, a
Yeah.
big part of why the movie exists, because they said it deserved to be a film,
Sure.
or they put the heat on it, the light on it, that said this should be, this deserves that stage. And so for that audience, that the first audience it had, I think you're right. They had already put together the movie. They'd gone as far as casting even
Yeah.
what the movie looked like, right? And who would be the right director to tell that story as well. So there was definitely some energy around like wanting to satisfy that audience. But first and foremost, I feel the person I most had to satisfy, or the person I was most kind of worried about taking care of, was Asia King, who told the
Yeah.
story, and making sure that she felt not only taken care of, but that I had also done her text,
Yeah.
her world building, that I had like done it the honor that she felt it deserved.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it was even like you said, other the heat around it. Other people were going to make the movie at one point, and who's to say what that would have been? But it would have been different. I think that's a safe bet.
I'm
Uh,
not the first choice, but I was the last choice.
yeah, and I would argue the best choice because I think there's a connection that you can tell with the material, but not necessarily the content. Like that's the thing. I think a lot of people would have wanted to make the movie based on like, oh, I see this, and like the vibe of it being either like grimier or sleazier, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like a sleazy movie can be great if it's done right, but I feel like
Hey, we love sleaze.
exactly. But I think the whole fun of this is that it's not like there's something about having a narrator, even on Twitter, who's like, I'm going to tell you this and it's going to seem like a mess, and it is a mess, but there's a remove that you can have because I'm telling it as a story, as opposed to like in the moment when there's a fear this could all come crumbling down. She's doing it as an author at the time, and I think that's something you recognized, I think, better than almost anyone else would have.
Yeah, she totally tells a story with a distance, right? It's like, I'm not saying that this is that movie, but I was thinking about Goodfellas.
Yeah.
When you're The thing that happens in Goodfellas as you're watching it, because you have a narrator handling the story, is that that person makes it out. And
Yeah.
because that person makes it out, or there is another side for that person, I feel like as the movie can go really far, or has the ability to go really far, but that you have some safety net, right? Like the person who is carrying me through all of this is going to be okay at the very least. And I think having that assurance allows for the darkest corners to sort of shine, right? Like,
Totally.
or I think you can let go to a degree, and I feel that that's the plus of the narrator, is knowing at least one person makes it out.
Yeah.
I don't know that people are making it out okay,
Yeah.
but they are making it
Yeah.
out.
Something's gonna happen. It's the difference.
Yeah.
It's the difference between like whether you have a story or your friend. like that awful thing that happened, or just that wild story that you tell, knowing that someone's telling it, like we all had that thing that like in the moment it was awful and it wasn't funny, but now it's a really funny story. And it's because there's the distance and okay, I made it out okay. And maybe it was embarrassing or it was dangerous, but I made it out okay. And now I see like, oh, that's a hell of a story. And that's the thing I think, sometimes you even think of in the moment is like, oh my God, this is going to be a story one day. And thinking of that actually makes things better. And that's the sense you also get reading is like, okay, this should have been the worst like day and a half of her life. And maybe it is, but you definitely get the sense she's like, oh, this is going to be a story I tell everyone.
Yes. I feel also something you're touching on is when it has happened to us, whether or not we're aware in the moment that it's, worth putting pen to paper, it's that when you look back on those really harrowing or traumatizing stories, is that we do tend to rewrite them, right? Yeah. Beyond writing them, we also rewrite them 100%. And we recast ourselves when we look back, because I think a part of processing the trauma or the experience is to recast you either, I think most of us, how we recast ourselves is like having had all the words in the moment, right. I remember you're not going to believe this, like a simile, but I remember when I was a kid or when I was a teenager and I was watching Dawson's Creek, like I remember being like, gosh, I wish I could say all the things just like that, yeah. Like that the way it actually happens in the moment is you don't have that script, but like with some distance, like you walk away and it's like all the best jokes happen as soon as you walk out of that circle. Yeah. And so it's something like with time, there is not only an ability to write the better version of the story, recast it, like dress it the best. And that's a bit of like, I think that's a lot of the aesthetic of the movie too, is that, yeah, it probably didn't look like this, yeah. But I wanted the final product, the final thing that she told to me had this like patina all over it that was like dressed and tied with a bow, it was better than the real thing,
And that's the filmmaking nature of it. Obviously, you get to have the conversations with her that, we all would want to, but then you get to take some of that and then also go, well, yeah, but I saw this and I know this will play better. And it still speaks to everything that you're getting at. And it still tells the story, but the look of it will look like what I'm imagining in my head. And also what I think maybe other people, and there's the like we said, I think it really does feel like everyone's movie, being too slavish to any one person's wouldn't have worked, even if it was her. And obviously she needs to feel happy, but it's a movie. It's, there is that remove, like it is interesting to talk to people who have a movie made about them of like, is it weird? Because it didn't happen that way. Or the movie about Kurt Warner, the football player, like you met your wife that way, but I'm sure you didn't say that thing. Is it weird? Weird cosplay? Like it's kind of kinky in a weird way. Yeah. I mean, he's religious. He wasn't into that part, but like, yes. There's something to it. And I imagine for her, it must have been a weird experience of like, okay, this is exactly what happened. That's not. Okay, I trust
you. What's funny though is that so in doing this press tour with her, from meeting we met in 2017. We met over the phone when I got the movie. I wanted this. I felt I needed, even though look, I got Killer Films and GG Films and Ramona Films, who were the producers that I was in this sort of audition process with. They minted me as the filmmaker, and then A24 had come on board and they had also minted me as the filmmaker. I felt I needed her to co-sign. She was the final co-sign, right? So when from having met then to playing the movie for her before we go to Sundance, to playing the movie at Sundance, to releasing the movie this summer and doing this bit of a tour together, it's curious, but I actually think through some kind of osmosis, like I think some of it has, the film has actually reshaped some of how she is looking at it too. We were in an interview together and there's an aspect of the movie that she's like, that happened. But I know from our actual conversation
I made that up.
Yeah, I made that up, but I do think that that's kind of radical, and I'm sure if some aspect of your life was being retold or mine, I would, and maybe because we're also creative and when we write, but there's certainly stories that I've heard other people tell that I believe have happened to me
Yeah.
because they've told them so well that I've, like, downloaded them in a way. But yeah, that is kind of funny. It's speaking to the filmmaking, something that was important to me in terms of the look and the feel and the sound of the movie was that I kept having this feeling, or I had this thought that what if in 50, 60 years, there's like a kid at a video store. I imagine there's one video store in the world in 50 or 60 years, right? And the kid asks the clerk, like, what's a movie that really feels like 2015? And that person says Zola, right? Or like there's a list of other movies, but like Zola is one of those movies. And then I wanted it to feel like a time capsule. I wanted it to feel like, even for us in 2021, 22, being able to look at it, it feels like before, it feels like the past, right? Then there's like some kind of romance around what that period looked like, because even though it's only 6 years ago, not only does it feel far, I do have a kind of romantic idea of what that looked like, only because we've lived through these last 2 fucking years, which have been truly demonic, right?
We're always living through the best and worst time simultaneously.
Yes, exactly. I mean, sure, while we were in it, I'm sure I was like, this is hell.
Yeah.
But
and you're like, wait, just wait. Just wait.
Wait a minute. I'm actually in hell now, or purgatory. And when I look back, I forget how sweet that tasted.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think it even feels modern in a way of just the social media aspect of it, and just whether it's even just simply like the Twitter sound is so evocative of a feel of now, because so much of the story could be anytime. Like, it's not completely unique to go on a road trip and get in trouble. That's a story we've been doing since we had cars. And like, sex work is even older than that. Like, all of these things are old, but the way it's presented is new. And then just your choices to be like, well, it's going to be male nudity, just because that's not a thing you would see in this movie. That's, there's in real life, equal parts nudity. Every other movie version, only boobs, because that's just what film has taught you happens in that scenario. And it's a really fun recalibration, but also just a radicalization of, no, this is what you also see. Like, how about you think about that? And it's another reason why I think like this was the perfect film for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, there's that one montage of sex work that happens in the movie where you meet this kind of train of men. I was just thinking that, like, my DP, Ari Wagner, and I, and actually the production designer, Katie Byron, the three of us had this ongoing conversation from pre-production to production of trying to cite films in which we had seen sex work, 1, 2, where we had seen nudity, we'd seen women naked, the American films specifically, where it had felt like there was, what's the word I'm looking for? Consent, right? Yeah. Like consent between the filmmakers and the performer, like the filmmaking, that sometimes, and it's something about American cinema specifically, like in European cinema specifically, when I see nudity, I'm like, everyone seems totally fine for the most part. There are definitely films I can cite where I'm like, this is having a really bad energy, but there are certain, and I'm sure our list coincides, but this is gross generalization of American film versus European film. But there are many movies I can cite where I have seen women naked mostly, and it feels like free, and it feels comfortable, and it feels very sexy, and it feels inviting, and it's like horny. And then I'll see the same thing in an American movie and I feel distressed. I find myself being like, is everyone okay? Is this actress okay? I start thinking about everyone behind the camera. Like, my brain is just drifting to the thing that it's not even supposed to be about. And I was trying to understand like what that was, what the thing was that when we sat down and watched an American movie versus watching like, a French film, what was that we didn't have here? What was I lacking, And so there was like this long conversation around that, and then a multitude of conversations around that. And then there was also what did sex actually look like? Like when we had sex, you know, if I was a person having sex, like what was I actually looking at? And the vulnerability of a man also exposing himself, and just the looking at sex work as work, looking at it as an exchange, and actually being with the woman who was being purchased, as opposed to like being in the gaze of the buyer, right? And I think it is revolutionary in some ways, but I just know that it had to be that way because the women were already so exposed. And I felt like, to go back to that conversation around like, what is that thing that happens in American film? I feel we also struggle with respecting our protagonists, our female protagonists, especially non-white female protagonists who's suddenly nude. I think it would just be really hard to value and respect her. And I knew some portion of the audience was already going to be challenged by what these women did, and even buying what Zola was saying because of the work that she was dipping her toe into.
Totally. And I mean, all of that is 100% accurate, just because we have a very weird relationship with sex here, whether it's Americans in general or just, you know, Hollywood. Like everyone wants to see it, but no one wants to actually see it. They want to see you kind of just like move around on each other for about 23 seconds. And it's a very weird, like, that's not really giving me what I think you want me to get out of this. But at the same time, something like this, like I can only imagine like that kind of scene in this movie, how false it would feel, how much you'd come out of the movie and go, well, now I'm just wondering what happened that day. Because you just would imagine like, okay, something else was written, somebody didn't want to do it. Like you start going to all those bad scenarios that you know about and you just don't want to feel. And everything does feel here like, no, we know what we're doing and we know what this is, because also sex is silly. Like it just, if you just think about what you're watching, it's very silly. Like no one wants to see themselves do it, because
no, someone does.
Yeah, someone wants to see you do it.
Someone does. Someone does, for sure. Yeah, but sex is a little bit goofy, right? Like, and I think when you're actually, well, when you're in the intimacy of being inside of it with somebody, that's why there can be a good deal of laughter. But like, sex is like not all the way hot. No. And there are funny sounds and smells, and like they're all, it's really like animalistic.
It's real.
And, yeah, it's super real. And so like deconstructing it so that it doesn't have so much sexiness, but it's just reduced to like body parts, and it's just reduced to the like assembly line of what it is, right? It's like you meet, you take off your clothes, then you're touching, you know, maybe there's some light touching that leads to then the thing that's penetration, right? But like, what's sex just broken down into, what are the bullet points basically?
And it really speaks to like what someone's paying for in that scenario. Like, oh, this is what you left your house, like got in your car, drove to a hotel, paid a stranger money to meet another stranger to then go do the opposite and go home, possibly to your family. Like all of that is a choice.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I love that at the same time, it's not judgmental. Like the movie never comes out and says like, this is bad, but just says like, this version is bad. Like that's, I think, the other really interesting part of it is like, you know, clearly are making a movie that says this is an awful thing that can happen to people, but also not that the thing is awful. And that's this really interesting line that's walked. And it's another reason to love the film. It's just like, there's so much going on here while still telling a wildly entertaining story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're really touching on you've got it. You've got it.
Never mind. Cut the interview now.
It's not, I don't think sex work is work. I do believe that. And I really tried my best to remove any judgment from it. And I do think that in the final product is very clear. But we are in conversation with that. What is the tragedy here is the loss of agency. Exactly. It's not the work that they're doing. It's that they might not be choosing to do it. It's that they don't get to take home all the cash at the end of the day. Like that's the tragedy, right? Is that you would find yourself in a situation you don't want to be in. It's being sex trafficked, right? That's the bigger takeaway, or that's the conversation we should be having, that it can happen to someone you know. and that it is happening right next door and we don't necessarily know it.
Yeah. And I think also casting Coleman Domingo really helps because you're like, oh, well, I immediately want to know what's happening with, oh, I mean, even if you know what's going on, it's still, you're like, I want to see the turn. Oh, he did that turn real well and then snaps right back. All right, I get it.
Yes, he's so great, so special. Also, it's like I think both he and Riley are really great villains because
they're so different also.
Yeah, they're so different. And I think I don't know that rooting for them is not the right word, but they're like the bad guys that are super alluring and very like they're charismatic and sexy.
You want to see more of them. I don't want them to win and I don't want them to meet me, but I want to see more. It's like I love Red Rocket this year. And one of the things is like Simon Rex. I don't want to spend any time with that character.
Not a second of time with him.
I want to watch him for the next 50 hours. Like I want to see everything that like a human being is even a weird thing to call it, but like what that thing is up to is perfect because that's the evil in the world. Like that's also why I think like same what you guys like the prestige of it all is sort of hard to come by with like the generic Oscar voter. Like it's just funny, like Ari shoots this film, then does Power of the Dog. And like one is very clearly up a voter's alley, and one is like, well, we're trying to get you to watch it. And it's because these are like very real people and like the villainy is real and to in the grand scheme of things, low stakes. But to the people involved, the most important thing in the world. And as a way to
thanks for acknowledging that Ari shot both movies.
I love people who shoot two wildly different films that I both love for different reasons. Like my favorite thing is James Laxton shoots Barry Jenkins and Kevin Smith movies.
Yes.
Like I love that that's a thing. Just like I love that Ari is like Zola, Power of the Dog. They couldn't be more different, but damn if I didn't have a good time at both.
Our production designer, Katie Byron, also did Come On, Come On.
Which is amazing. It's like, what's the most like heartwarming show your grandma movie? And what's the movie to get slapped?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, Joey.
My pleasure. I love this film. I was waiting years. It was my #1 year in advance movie to see, and it completely lived up to the hype. So
thank you. Did you watch it at home or did you get to see it in the theater?
I had to see it at home because I had to see it for prior to release because like you guys obviously showed it at Sundance, then it sat around for like 15 months.
100 years. Yes.
Exactly. Correct. I had meant to see it a second time in a theater, but then it became like, oh, death. Maybe I won't be seeing.
You remember that? Yeah, that's where we are right now.
Yep. Back to like I took a couple weeks off from the theater and I went yesterday for Scream and it was like 6 people in a 100-person theater press screening. So that was okay.
Was that fun to watch it that way?
The movie was great in person. There is a weird thing of like, I do feel like this should be with more people like screaming and yelling at this, and not like yelling at the screen, like don't be that person, but like engaging with the movie. But I also don't want to die. Like there's that.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
It's funny. There's some screenings happening in LA this month of old movies actually. And I had a friend who went to the New Beverly a couple of days ago and took a picture and I was like, oh, it's like shoulder to shoulder.
Oh yeah, no
one's wearing like N95s.
I knew I needed a little time off because I took my girlfriend to see Spider-Man because it was a thing. She's like, oh, I want to see what everyone's talking about. And we even went like upstate New York to like their like Carter Lake house that she has. It was packed, and I was like, I'm not doing this again for a while. Like, this is not.
I do want to. I've been thinking about going to the movies at like 2 p.m. That might be fun.
One of my pregnant friends wants to see Scream, and I'm like, one, don't just because, but also if you're going, like, go at like 11 in the morning.
Yeah. Because that's the senior crowd. That's the senior crowd. That's
when they're not seeing Scream.
Yeah, they're not seeing Scream.
Or sorry, Zola, but like also.
Yeah.
You know.
No, but that's the time to go. I really do because I miss it. I miss watching movies in that way. But
I mean, I'm always pro that, but also, especially you don't die. Like I want the next movie.
Thank you. I will keep that in mind. It was really lovely talking to you. You have a good rest of day and
you too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.